I think it's fair to say that this guest is a heavyweight of British business. His LinkedIn profile is a carnival of successful British tech stories. Coming from an esteemed background, including Oxford University and Mckinsey's, William Reeve decided very early on that he wanted to pursue a career as an entrepreneur, not so much an employee. This culminated essentially in him building and selling a corporate research business, pursuing technology-based subscription businesses, most notably LoveFilm. Since then, William has advised and been involved with some of the UK's top technology-orientated businesses, including Zoopla, Graze, Secret Escapes, and most recently, Goodlord, who are a digital property lettings automation platform who are doing some amazing work in that world. You do not want to miss this one. It is William Reeve. William, thank you so much for coming on the Tech Leaders podcast.
Thank you, Gareth.
Been really excited to get you on. I'm like a kid in a candy shop today. We've got so much to dip into. But let's start with today. It's a bit of a strange period on a global macro level, especially for the UK. What's your take on the current macro situation, and what kind of conversations are you having at board level right now?
Yeah, I mean, right now, Gareth, it's an unprecedented period, actually. So board conversations are really focusing on two things, I think, in the world's eye. I mean, one is for the tech industry, which I've been in throughout my career. The issue is, especially for unprofitable businesses that are reliant on fundraising, the issue is the fundraising environment. Stock market valuations started falling last year, and that has really started to catch up with the private companies, the early stage companies. So, any business that's sort of expecting to fundraise in the next few months is having a very different conversation with their board than they probably wanted to. And the other issue is, which I think is definitely not unique to tech, but is a business issue, consumer issue, political issue everywhere, is inflation. Of course, it started with the energy markets, the disruption, which really started last year, I suppose, but has been accentuated by the Ukraine war. But now we're talking about almost double-digit inflation in the UK. That is a real business challenge. We've always faced some issues around, for example, tech salaries and just recruiting people in a very competitive market.
Yeah.
People, we've had quite a few people at Goodlord who've been sort of tempted by doubling their pay to leave, sort of situation. And generally speaking, we've managed to hang on to people. But that's always been an issue to some extent in the tech sector, but it's now becoming an issue for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the salaries in the tech sector have gone crazy in the last sort of 12 months, haven't they? It's becoming harder to hold on to good people. But tell us a little bit about Goodlord, what problem you're trying to solve and where you're at in your journey right now.
Well, Goodlord is ultimately on a mission to try and create the best rental experience in the world, using technology to do for renting properties what technology does in other sectors like retail or travel or transportation, things like that. And at this point in our sort of development, what we're really focusing on is the private rental sector that's handled by letting agents. So letting agents are professionals, business professionals who help landlords with several million properties in the UK. And that process hasn't changed too much in biblical times. It's a sort of full of paper and admin and sort of quite a lot of process around handling money, and there's quite a political sector, so there are a lot of regulations around it, and that's not really what your average letting agent sort of went into that career for, and what gets them out of bed in the morning. So we're trying to take that pain off their hands, and in the process make what is for most consumers one of the most stressful things in their lives, moving house, less stressful. And so we're trying to help the tenants, the landlords, the agents, the guarantors, all the people associated with that stressful house move experience.
And is the conveyancing part of that as well, then? Are you...
No. So it's really it's very much letting and not the buying and selling of houses. It's very much about renting, moving in somewhere that you're paying landlords.
Right.
And you've got a monthly rental payment or a weekly rental payment.
Right, okay, gotcha. So you take the pain out of that, basically, of the whole rental life cycle. Okay, then. So look, I want to turn the clock back then, William. I think most people who look at your profile or are aware of you want to talk about sort of the early days a little bit, and certainly LoveFilm, and we'll come on to that in a minute. But I wanted to talk about going right back to the beginning. Obviously, you left university and you ended up in legendary American consultancy firm Mckinsey's. And I've heard you talk about this in recent interviews that you've done, that you learned some really good business fundamentals there, which have stood you in good stead through your career. Can you talk to us about that experience of joining Mckinsey's and what you learned there and what lessons you still think of right now?
Yes, well, McKinsey is a well-known business, global consulting firm. It's got something of a notorious reputation. It's a very competitive firm to get into. Present company accepted. It has some very, very talented people in it, some of whom create something of a reputation for arrogance in some quarters. But touch wood, I managed to avoid meeting any of the some of the worst reputation that some of these firms have. I work with exceptional people, really enjoyed that. But I think the two key things I learned that have really helped me going forward, one was around teamwork and how you create high performing teams. And when you hear of, I don't know, some massive company has sort of got McKinsey in, you somehow assume there's a couple of buses arriving outside the headquarters and sort of streams of suited characters emerging. But actually, in nearly all McKinsey projects, the team's only 4 people. It operates somewhat, in principle, somewhat similar to the SAS. Actually, that the right team of 4 can sort of achieve what whole brigades of regular forces can achieve. And how you organise that team was one of the things that I learned from. And the other thing I learned at McKinsey was I did a project looking at the business information industry and learnt about subscription businesses, data businesses, research businesses, companies like Reuters and Bloomberg and Forrester Research, Jupiter Communications, Teledata, a bunch of companies, some of which are still around, some of which aren't. But that gave me the some knowledge that I needed to really kick off my entrepreneurial career. And I've stayed in subscription related business models almost throughout ever since.
Sure. So I was going to ask you about that specifically. You set up a business very early in your career by most people's standards. I heard you talking about this in the past, that you realized quite early on that, if you wanted to make any real money, you had to work for yourself, essentially, or, set up some sort of business venture.
So I was helped in the process of setting up a business by a bit of a forcing device, which is that McKinsey was kicking me out. I was on a program which we all got kicked out of. And although, to be fair, McKinsey kicks pretty much everybody out at some point. It's got an up or out culture which applies even to the guys right at the top. So I knew I needed to leave, and knew I needed to find something to do. And I teamed up with a friend of mine who he and I had done some work together at university, and he was at McKinsey with me, and we decided to set up a business together. We didn't immediately have any idea what that business would be, of course. We almost went about it sort of cart before horse. But because of the stuff I'd learned about the information industry, I was very attracted to doing that, and that's what Fletcher Research became. We were providing research into how the internet was developing for British organisations and companies, and so we were selling to people like the BBC or Lloyds Bank or British Telecom, and helping them predict what was going to happen with the internet, where it created opportunities, where it created threats, and people were prepared to pay us for that. And that was something which the experience I'd gained at McKinsey put us in really good stead. But as a youngster, I was only in my mid-20s at that point. Most sectors you'd struggle with a lack of experience. The reality was nobody had any experience with the internet, so we were on a level playing field.
Absolutely. So that was a really exciting period, wasn't it? I think, from this period, I think Amazon sort of come around then, but lots of other ones that didn't make it. There was a bit of an explosion not long after you sold Fletcher Research, wasn't it? Was that the dot-com boom? Did you see that coming and then jumped out the window? Or did you get lucky, William?
Well, obviously, I've been very lucky, so certainly really grateful for the luck I've had in my career. But at the time, we were doing this in the late 90s, so it absolutely was, history now tells us, part of the dot-com boom.
Yeah.
We were, even back then, I describe myself as quite old-fashioned by internet standards, and that we were actually trying to build a business with revenues and this very illusory and rarely held word, profit. And we ended up selling to a company, Forrester Research, which was very aligned with that and was made good profits, good margins, and grew quickly. And that was how we wanted our business to work. But we weren't aware we were in a bubble, but we were aware that there are lots of other businesses around, especially a lot of dot-coms, that weren't even chasing revenues. They were chasing eyeballs and ad impressions and things like this. And certainly very few of them were chasing profits. And some of our competitors in that research industry tried to copy the dot-coms really and racked up huge losses and grew quickly. But of course, when the music stopped in 2000, I was very glad to have partnered up with Forrester, which was a very well-run business, well managed, and sort of always understood the importance of being profitable. And Forrester's around to this day, and many of its competitors of that era aren't. So my business partner and I sort of split up actually at that point, and he ended up staying in Forrester for many years. Actually, he ended up moving to the States and ending up running their American business, whereas I moved to Amsterdam, where the European headquarters was, and started running the data products that Forrester had, which included the consumer research they were doing all over Europe. And that was helpful to me too. It taught me a lot about consumer trends and ultimately led to me setting up my next business.
Which was when you set up Love Film, I think, then, yeah?
That's right. And that happened because I'd been doing consumer research at Forrester as the dot-com boom had crashed. And Forrester was really feeling the pain of the dot-com crash because a lot of its customers were IT companies and things, and they were all getting hammered. The two things that were going up and to the right, so to speak, back then were mobile phones, which everybody seemed to was obviously the next big craze, and DVDs. And I suspect in 2022, some of your listeners don't even know how to spell DVD, Gareth. But back then, DVD was the big growth sector, and I'd not heard of any DVD businesses, so I started looking for opportunities in that space, thinking I want to hitch my sort of coattails to the DVD wagon. And it was from that the idea to create what became Love Film happened.
That was a bold move, I think, wasn't it? I mean, blockbusters were the king of that space, and you were going up against a real juggernaut there, weren't you? And this was pre-Netflix days, wasn't it?
That's right, it was, yeah.
So it was April 2006. Not many people were doing mail order film rental before that. Was anyone doing it? I don't think they were.
Yeah, so there were actually when Alex and I launched our business, it was 2003. And we were not the first into the market. There had been some people who got into it even, I think, as early as 2001.
Yeah.
But you're right, Blockbuster was the sort of juggernaut of the high street rental space. But actually, it was worse than that, Gareth, because we had, if you think in terms of sort of, I want to watch a movie tonight, you've got quite a lot of options. You had Sky Movies, you had sort of buying a DVD, even your local Tesco were doing it back then. And obviously HMV, Tower Records, people like that. And then you had the rental with Blockbuster or with Prime Video or with a whole bunch of small chains doing high street DVD rental. So we were going into that space. Not to mention, of course, Amazon was selling DVDs. And so there were lots of ways of buying entertainment, but most of them had a clear pain point associated with them. In Blockbuster's case, that was the late fees that they whacked people for if you were a few minutes late returning your movie.
Yeah.
And in Sky's case, although Sky does a brilliant job of hiding it, Sky is incredibly expensive based on the sort of how much you pay per movie you watch. And in Tesco's case, you don't necessarily want to buy a movie and own it forever if you're only going to watch it once. So none of these services had the range that you could offer with a centralized warehouse that you sent people from mail order. So that was what gave us confidence that there was just a better way of doing things.
When did people go from DVD rental on a mail order basis over to online? When did that shift happen in the industry?
Well, it's a good question. And back in 2003, we were vaguely aware that shift was coming, but it had been round the corner for years. I actually remember it when I was at IBM in the 90s. Back then it was called multimedia.
I haven't heard that term, multimedia, for years, but that was the lingo back then, wasn't it?
That was the lingo, yeah. And then in 2003, it was still round the corner. And then actually the first company worldwide to put a sort of proper A-list feature film online, rights all looked after, etc., etc. Any idea which company that was?
I don't know. Amazon?
No, fair enough. Well, no, it was in fact us. It was Love Film. We put King Kong online in 2006 with Universal.
Oh, wow.
That was the first one. Anywhere, we were ahead of the US, we were ahead of anywhere else. But it wasn't streaming, it was downloadable. It had this quite complicated rights management to enforce, so making sure people couldn't pirate it and stuff. But we were the first people to do that. And then streaming was still some years away, and streaming only started to kick off really in about 2009, 2010.
Right.
So it was 7 years after we set up the business, and DVD stayed in some form or other. I forget now exactly, but I think until about 2015 or 2016 or so. There was a lot of legs in them.
So you had exited by 2008.
I did. Although Love Film hadn't exited, or the shareholders didn't exit until Amazon bought the business in 2010. So by then we'd sort of brought in professional management, and all the founders had left. But I was the last one out in mid 2008.
Right. Okay. Good stuff. So. Well, that must have been an incredible moment in your life. You were a relatively young man at that point. You'd exited on 2 businesses already. You probably didn't need to work again. What were you thinking the day after that sort of transaction closed off and completed? Were you thinking, right, I'm going to get back into it. I'm going to go play golf. I'm going to go on a holiday for 3 years. What was going through your mind at that time?
Well, I mean, actually, the Love Film transaction wasn't that meaningful for the founders because we'd been diluted a long way down by all the capital that had gone into the business. So it wasn't as meaningful as the headlines figures would suggest, and that was because there were so many people involved in what's called the cap table. So the ownership was very, very dispersed. But you're right that I was in a fortunate position for my age, and I was already off and running and doing various things actually by 2010. But I think even though I've not had to work for money for many years, is it sharks? They say that if they stop swimming, they die, and I think I would be like that if I wasn't working and if I wasn't feeling like I was adding value and getting stuff done. And business is my natural hunting ground, if you like. It's intellectually fulfilling and interesting and challenging for me, and that's kind of what I enjoy doing.
Yeah, sure. So what do you think now about the online media space? Netflix are obviously dominant, but Amazon are putting in a pretty good fight as well, and you got other ones on the periphery. What's your forecast for the way people engage with content going forward?
Actually, I've somewhat left that sector behind. I think ever since streaming came along, it was obvious it was going to be much harder to make money as anybody other than the content creator.
Yeah.
And I never really fancied myself as somebody who was sort of, trying to create Hollywood movies.
Great a podcast, William. I'm sure you'd be great.
Do you think? Yeah, well, maybe that's where the next sort of treasure trove sits. That sector has always struggled to make money, actually, and as I say, the underlying rights holders can make money, but even Netflix has really struggled to make money. Spotify struggles to make money, and Amazon doesn't disclose the numbers properly, but Amazon's using it more as a wider business to sort of bind you into the Amazon system and lifestyle and ecosystem than it is because there's a huge amount of money in digital content.
Well, I've heard that the real profit in Amazon comes from AWS, and all the rest of it is quite challenging to make the rest of it profitable. But they own so many sectors, don't they, that I'm sure they could probably change that.
They do, and their retail business, actually, for all the naysayers about Amazon doesn't make any money out of retail, it does, in fact. It just runs at a much lower margin than most other retailers would operate. But you're right that AWS is a relatively speaking, is a much more profitable and lucrative business for them.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. So look, you exit Love Film, and obviously you've got a lot of options, I'm sure, at that point. And I know Zoopla came along, and that took up a lot of your life. And then I know you set up Secret Escapes and stuff like that. But before we sort of maybe unpack that a little bit, you clearly get a lot of these offers, William, okay? You need to say yes to some of them. You need to say no to other ones. Offers of NED work, offers of consultancy, offers to set up businesses. How do you assess what is a winner and what is a loser? How do you assess what you want to proceed with and what do you want to put your time into?
Yeah, it's a good question, Gareth. So how do I decide which opportunities to take up and how do I assess winners and losers? I think there's slightly different questions actually there. And I think I've done a lot of investing in private companies as an angel, as they call it, often helping founders set up seed business by investing in the business in them. And I have a fairly consistent way of assessing there if I think the business is going to win or not, which is partly by asking exactly that question, actually. Do I believe this business has a strategy to win? And I'm quite strategic. I tend to look at things through a strategy lens. And I want to feel that I can understand how a business is going to be able to compete and win.
Yeah.
And I want to know that the founders are thinking at that even right at the beginning. And they might not have answers to all sorts of questions. But if they're not thinking in terms of what's the business model, what's our point of difference, what's our advantage, how are we going to fight off kind of our local rivals, our American rivals, international rivals, if they haven't got reasonable answers to those questions, then I'm not excited.
Sure.
And in terms of what I do myself, I'm afraid I'm probably not as thoughtful or strategic at that as I am on some of the other stuff I do. But I've tended to not have a plan. But I'm quite an active networker, I suppose. I live in London. There's a lot of sort of like-minded people around, and I've often followed my nose and trusted my gut and sort of evaluated opportunities based on whether they felt like they're an interesting thing to commit time to, and most importantly, I think whether the people involved were people I wanted to work with. Because I haven't had to work for money per se, but what I'm not going to do is work for people or with teams which I don't enjoy working with.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. Because how you spend your time is more important than how you spend your money, isn't it? I mean, it's the main asset that you've got. Do you invest in many businesses that you're not involved with on a hands-on basis as well?
Yeah, so I've invested in over 50 businesses and I haven't been hands-on in very many of them at all. But it depends a bit how you define hands-on. But right now, for example, I only have commitments to 2 businesses.
Sure.
But I've still got investments in a few dozen businesses.
Have you ever been asked to do Dragon's Den?
I have not, no.
Never say never, eh? If you're listening, Dragon's Den, you got to get William on the Dragon's Den. Yeah, you'd make a good dragon, I think. I wanted to ask you about Zoopla. It's something, obviously, that it's a sector that you've almost sort of revisited in many respects with Goodlord. Talk us through your decision to join Zoopla and what you got from that experience.
Yeah, so Zoopla was the next business that my Love Film business partner, Alex Justerman, went on to set up. And at one level, that was rather annoying because he persuaded our chief technology officer, Simon Kane, to join him. And Simon is one of the most talented and inspirational people I've ever worked with. So having him leave Love Film was irritating. But Alex was incredibly talented. And what he wanted to do was sort of take the property website sector on a level, basically. And so the initial plan wasn't that fully formed, but it was to offer the UK house buying public free valuations of any house in the country, and that had not been done before. That sounded like enough of a strategy to sort of get going on, and it had an answer to one of my questions I mentioned a moment ago, which is what's your point of difference? How is this going to compete? The only challenge was we didn't know how to do free instant valuations, so we had to figure that out. And I was able to help the team there. I had some experience from my analytical days back in the research industry, which I was able to use, and I was able to help find some people who were able to build a very, very effective valuation model very, very quickly. And that was how we got up and running. So I invested in the business. I took a board seat and helped Alex sort of find more investors and get that valuation model up and running. And from there, really, the rest was history.
It's always been a really great site to navigate around. I think that the technology just underpinned the success of the organization, I suppose. And how did Zoopla go about that then? Because I do think it's one of the most successful websites to come out of the UK in the last 20 years.
Yeah, so Zoopla, at some level or other, property portals is not a new thing, right? They're in every developed country in the world. So it gives you a lot of inspiration, and everybody's sort of constantly improving and iterating. The bar's going up all the time, and that helps everybody really sort of develop and improve the product constantly.
Cool.
Alex, my old business partner and the founder of Zoopla, is definitely not a tech genius. He's a business genius. Not tech
Right.
is. He looks at tech as a consumer looks at it, and he knows what he likes, what he doesn't like, and he knows kind of what he wants. And he is quite involved at quite a high level of detail in terms of what he wants to see and changes he's looking for. But in terms of knowing kind of, if you like, how the sausages are made, or kind of, wow, there's this amazing new ingredient, we can make a totally different type of sausage, if you'll let me stay with that metaphor, that's not how he's operating. And until he's seen probably some other service sort of start to do something, he wouldn't necessarily understand what the technology is going to do for him. He needs to see and feel it as a user, and that gives him a lot of strength because it puts him in the same seat as all the users of the service, which is often a difficult seat to be in when you're sort of building stuff and you're looking at it from the point of view of, well, I couldn't do this and I can't do that and this cost me too much. You don't necessarily think through, but wouldn't it be amazing if we could build this? And the property portals, the valuation idea of doing free valuations wasn't unique to the UK. The US had started to see that model appear through Zillow. So right. Alex had seen that and just knew that would be really, really popular in the UK.
Yeah, sure.
So the question was, how do we do it?
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of successful online businesses, I've got to ask you a question about Secret Escapes, because it was a very unique business model. So tell us a little bit about what market research you did and why you came up with the idea of Secret Escapes.
I came up with the idea of it in a manner of speaking, but I didn't end up setting it up. What happened there was I'd been asked to join a travel website company as a non-exec director. Right. And it was a different business. It was called Deal Checker, and it was founded by three very talented entrepreneurs. But it was essentially a comparison site for flights. That was mostly what it was. And it was while I was on the board there that I learned about flash sales for travel and hotels. Yeah. And in particular, the market leader actually worldwide there was a French company called Voyage Privé. And I learned about that model. And there was something very interesting about it and how it interplayed with the Google process for finding hotels, because the hotel industry at that point had a particular thing around what was essentially a most favored nation clause. You couldn't offer better prices publicly than you would offer elsewhere on Google, but you could do that privately. So this sort of concept of creating essentially a private members club that got better deals, steeper discounts than were available to the public, had a particular effectiveness in hotels. And Deal Checker actually had a real head start on this because they were a comparison site for hotels and so on already. Sure. And they had a membership list which they were already using, but they were just showing those members public deals. And so the key insight was we should be showing them private deals. We should be negotiating deals of our own and putting them behind the membership gate. and look at what's happening in France. We could do that over here, and we should do that as a separate business. So, and that's what happened. And the three guys ended up selling Deal Checker actually, and setting up Secret Escapes, and I was able to help them get it off the ground and find investors for it.
Looking back now, William, you've been in the business world for a long time. What kind of moments stand out for you as being watershed moments or milestone moments in your career?
Yeah, watershed's a good question, Gareth. I think some of them are obviously around when businesses change hands and when they're sold. And I think my first business, Fletcher Research Selling, was one of those watershed moments. I think in last year there was another one when business I was chairing, Nutmeg, an investment platform, was bought by JP Morgan, and that was again sort of actually a critical deal for everybody concerned, and hopefully even for JP Morgan. And I think another one is obviously sort of when you take on a full-time role. I haven't taken on many full-time roles in my career, but I think joining Goodlord in 2018 was a watershed moment for me. And then initially, I was only on a temporary. I was really on a project really to help some investors sort of understand what to do next with the business. But the real watershed was when we realised we could really grow the business, and we raised money, and I went full-time, and my role became a permanent role. And that was in the middle of 2018, and that has proved to be something of a watershed moment too. So those are the ones that stand out. I think you could probably quickly get me to think of a few more.
So when you're around the dinner table, maybe on Christmas Day, and when your very young members of your family ask you, Uncle William, what do you do for a living? What is your job? What do you tell them?
I think I'm the sort of rich uncle rather than that they actually care what I do for a living. But I think I would describe myself as, to be fair, I don't pigeonhole neatly into a particular category, because I certainly would describe myself as an entrepreneur. But at the moment, I am running somebody else's business effectively. So although I do have a share in the business, it's not a business I created. There will be some people I would describe myself to as an investor. And there'll be others very, very high level where I'm a businessman focusing on technology. And I think take your pick, I'm some combination of those three things.
Well, the one thing that strikes me about you, William, is that you don't seem like a lot of the people who come on this podcast have had really successful careers in normally one, two, sometimes three different sectors or industries. You've danced around pretty much all of them in some sort of guise. I mean, you've dipped your toe into a lot of different areas. Is that an observation you're conscious of? And how do you typically adapt to sectors?
Yeah, I think I like business in general. I like solving problems, and I like using technology. And the thread that's gone through all my stuff is that using technology to build and improve things has been constant. I also really like subscription business models. So, and I'd widen that slightly to say highly predictable business models. So nearly all the businesses I've been involved with have either been subscription or had a very high level of predictability to them, because customers keep reusing the service.
Yeah.
So in that respect, there's probably a little bit more in common with the various businesses I've been in, even though they've spanned everything from luxury hotels through to managing a long-term wealth, through to renting DVDs, and now helping letting agents improve the rental industry. So there are many more things in common than there are differences between those things. But you're right that I haven't stayed in one industry, and my business partner from my first business is in contrast that he has. And that's been very successful for him.
Sure.
And I do somewhat wonder what would have happened if I'd done that. But I think my first love is technology, not a particular industry, and I've followed my first love, not tried to stick with all my knitting at once.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great answer. So in terms of global technology innovation right now, then what are you most excited about?
I mean, the stuff that sort of I've got my sort of arms and my sleeves rolled up on at the moment is around payments. And I think we're very fortunate in the UK. We're right at the vanguard of sort of fintech and financial services innovation. And we've got a very enlightened regulator, the FCA, who has really supported innovation and created things like a sandbox that is designed to let sort of startups kind of compete with the big boys. And the payment side of it, and sort of how that works, and open banking, giving sort of everybody, giving consumers ownership of their data, but allowing them to open it up to additional services. There's still a lot more innovation to come in that space, and at Goodlord, we're trying to use as much of that as we can. We're big believers in using open banking to help simplify the process of improving financial information. We're trying to streamline and improve the payments process. A lot of payments going on in the process of letting properties, obviously, and we're bringing a lot of technology to that. We're actually creating hundreds of bank accounts a day, giving every tenant who goes through the platform a unique bank account, for example. So there is, I think there's still a lot more innovation to come in the sort of payments and financial services sector. That's the stuff that I'm really excited about at the moment.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. The fintech sector is something which we do really well in the UK as well, I think, isn't it? And Nutmeg has been a big part of that as well. And I'm sure
That's right.
You learned a lot from that experience. So tell us a little bit about William outside of work then. What kind of stuff do you do to achieve balance in your life?
Yeah, so historically I've been lucky enough to travel quite a lot. I always am typically planning my next travel trip when I've just got back from another travel trip. But that's been a bit harder in the last couple of years. So actually, right now I've just started to I bought a place near the coast on the south coast, and I'm starting to get out on the water more and sort of learning some of the absolute basics. Still struggling to tie a bowline knot, but I've been learning that sort of stuff in the last few months.
Oh, lovely. So looking back at your career, William, this is something I always ask guests. What advice would you give to your 21-year-old self?
Oh, what advice would you give my 21-year-old self? I think I've never forgotten the scene in the 1960s movie The Graduate with Dustin Hoffman,
Oh, I know the
who's
one.
I think a 21-year-old. That's the point, isn't it? He's a graduate, and he's at some dinner party with people who, God help me, probably a bit basically my age. His parents, mates. He gets a bit of advice from some sort of corporate suit in the cocktail party, which is, "Young man, I got one word for you: plastics." And the point of that the point of that scene is the point of that word, if you like, is because back in the 60s, the key growth industry was plastics.
Right.
And of course, these days it's been technology for a lot longer than it's been plastics. But I think my advice for a 21-year-old is go for growth. Look for the sectors that got growth in them.
Sure.
And which doesn't mean crypto, especially right now.
Yeah.
But technology has an underlying advantage around growth because Moore's law, which is the sort of constant improvement in price performance of technologies, how computers just get cheaper and faster all the time,
Yeah.
as every successive launch of an iPhone demonstrates. And that gives technology a huge advantage in terms of it's going to have growth. As long as innovation continues, technology is going to deliver growth.
Yes.
So go for growth, but that's sort of in some ways it's going to probably lead you to get into the technology industry.
Yes.
And I think as a 21-year-old, you're not going far wrong if you look for careers in the technology industry.
Completely agree, and fantastic advice. How do you see the workplace evolving over the coming years? We've just come out of a pandemic. Hybrid working seems like it's here to stay. What's your thoughts on that?
I definitely think hybrid working is here to stay. I think the workplaces already feel completely different to how they felt even 5 years ago. And I think the UK is at the vanguard of that sort of stuff because we're one of the most digitally adoptive countries in the world. We've got decent enough broadband to work from home pretty much everywhere. I realise it might not feel that way in sort of outposts of Dorset sometimes. And we've got a high level of technological literacy. And pretty enlightened large organisations who, are amongst the most adoptive of new technologies anywhere in the world. So I think we've seized hybrid working quite aggressively, especially in London. And I think in many cases, people have surprised themselves at how effective it is. So I think hybrid working is definitely here to stay. But at the same time, I think there's a difference between hybrid working and fully remote. And I think the sort of real successes that happen in business tend to happen through creating a sort of successful organizations, and the successful organizations have strong cultures.
Yes.
And I think it's still yet to be proven whether you can create sort of time and time again strong cultures in a fully remote environment. So I feel like the future is hybrid, not fully remote.
Yeah.
We're all finding our balance there, and we've still got a lot of discovery and learning to do there.
What do you think, William, about people coming into the jobs market in the last couple of years? When I was coming into the jobs market, I was surrounded by experienced people in whatever sector you're in. They're missing out on that a little bit, Or do you think there's going to be an impact in the medium to long term with those people coming into the jobs market in the last 2 years?
I think it's been a challenge, just as it has for sort of students or sort of people kind of approaching major milestones like graduation. Doing that remotely is not quite the same. And I think learning a craft, learning kind of your sort of business basics, really, learning how to sell, learning how to create, learning how to work in teams, learning how to build. So many of those things are easier sort of face-to-face in a social environment.
Sure.
And doesn't mean you can't do them remotely. But I think it's tempting, isn't it? Because any individual day of the week, you're sort of, I think, do I have to go into the office today? But what you know, in the short term, you might feel like you're pretty fully productive at home. But if you do that every single day, you don't know what you're missing out on. You're missing out on those conversations you overhear, the water cooler, the sort of random serendipity, stuff that you can't schedule through a Zoom call or something. So I think as a youngster, I think you're going to develop your career faster if you find a culture which is manages to combine the best of office work and remote working.
Completely agree. Serendipity and the water cooler effect is a very real thing, isn't it? Okay, last question, William. What sort of story or anecdote have you been inspired by, whether it's in a book, a film, documentary, whatever, maybe in the last couple of years?
One thing that I've found inspiring is a book that I read many years ago. It was after I sold my first business, so I had made some money, and I was in a fortunate position of sort of trying to figure out how to spend my time and money. And there was a book called Rich Dad, Poor Dad. It helped me think through how, while I had up until then been working for money, actually a better way of doing things is to get your money to work for you. And that's something that stayed with me ever since, and is partly why I was so passionate about Nutmeg, which is a business that was trying to help people build their wealth so that their money could work for them.
Absolutely, that's a great answer, and I can second that. And that is a book. We'll put it in the show notes. That's Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki, actually, who is still very active on YouTube and so on and so forth. William, thank you so much for coming on the show. The listeners I'm sure, will take so much value from that. Really appreciate your time. Thanks for coming on the Tech Leaders Podcast.
Thank you very much, Gareth. I've enjoyed it.
So I just want to take this opportunity to thank you for downloading this episode. We really love doing this show and are absolutely humbled by all of the incredible people who download and listen, plus the incredible guests who take the time to come on and share their secrets and experiences with our listeners. Please, can I ask that you take a couple of seconds to subscribe or follow the show? This small action means a lot to us and helps us greatly. Thank you. As you quite possibly have heard me mentioning in the past, we record the mass majority of our episodes at an amazing studio facility here in Cardiff at Tramshed Tech. Tramshed Tech is a collaborative community of entrepreneurs and scaling businesses geared towards supporting growth in tech, digital and creative industries across an ever-increasing collection of locations and partner locations, UK-wide and internationally. It really is the perfect place for your business to start up, scale up, accelerate, or innovate. Head over to tramshedtech.co.uk or just search Tramshed Tech on your favorite social media platform.